All right, hi everyone. I don't know how well this is going to work out, but I'm going to give it my best shot. I'm not in class because I've had some fairly serious illness thing hit my family and I've got to take care of that. However, I'm still going to lecture, hopefully. All right, so we'll talk about the Amish on Wednesday, I hope. But rite of passage, I talked about this at the beginning of class. This is the term that Arnold van Gennep, who is a sociologist, came up with, describing people going from one status to another. So separation is followed by, can I do this? No. Separation is followed by transition, which is in turn followed by reincorporation. So the person going through the ritual is separated from the rest of the community through dress, through action, through language, through something. Then they go through that weird transition phase where they don't have a fixed identity. They're in between identities. And often there's death symbolism. And this is what's known as a liminal zone, Liminal. And then reincorporation, they're brought back into the community as a member of that community, but with a new status. All right, so the transition, I was just talking about this. It marks the passage from, single to married, from childhood to adulthood, from somebody who's not in the group to somebody who's in the group. And as I said, no clear identity. Oh, normal rules don't apply. Why not? Because rules apply to people that have an identity. So like with the Amish, right? If you're a kid, you have to do what your parents say. If you're a member of the church, you have to do what God says. But if you're neither a kid nor a member of the church, there's nothing that applies to you. Normal rules don't apply. Symbolism, and then there's that term, liminality. All right, one famous example of this was by anthropologist Maurice Bloch, a neat little book called Prey into Hunter. And so he's in New Guinea, because every anthropologist likes to go to New Guinea. And one of the things that's interesting about the Orokivan people is the symbolism that they have in their homes. They live up on stilts because the river floods on a regular basis. And so that's like, lifting everything up so you don't have a flooded basement. And they also use the underside to bury the bodies of the dead. So your ancestors are always with you underneath your house. But when there's not flooding, that's also where you keep your pigs. So you should be seeing a connection between the dead and between pigs, since they're both kept under the house. So there's symbolism there. Remember it. Every once in a while there's a ritual. Some of the Orokivan men put on a fancy costume made with feathers from birds that are found in the forest. The forest is also the area associated with death because that's where the spirits of your ancestors go. Their bones might be under your house, but their spirits are out in the forest. And the men will go and collect pigs from houses and they will slaughter them. And this is very traumatic because people get very attached to their pigs. And by attached, I mean nursing their pigs, like feeding them breast milk. They're like your babies. Now, Orokivan children go through a ritual. It doesn't happen every year. It's more like every 3 or 4 or 5 years when you get enough kids roughly the same age. And the men in the feathered costumes go through, and instead of slaughtering the pigs, they collect the kids, take them to the altar where they would slaughter them, and they don't actually do that because it wouldn't make a very good ritual if you kill your children, because the community is not going to survive, obviously. But they tell the kids that they've been killed, and they pull them off into the forest where the spirits of the dead reside. And so these kids are dead, right? They were alive. They've been separated from the community, and now when they're in this transitional liminal phase. So what happens when you're in the liminal phase? Well, you learn cultural history. You're kept away from your family. You are, bond with your peer group, but you learn, what the Orokiva people do, music, oral traditions, rituals, magic. And then they also make these feathered costumes that are the pig-killing ones. And they get these feathers from the forest, the birds of the forest. And so they're gone for several weeks. And I'm guessing that an entire 3 or 4 week period without any tweens in the Orokivan village is probably very peaceful. But they return, and they don't return quite yet because they're not alive yet. They only return from the dead once they've gone through, gathered pigs from the households, and killed the pigs in the village square. And when they eat the pig meat, that is when they come back to life, except now they're immortal in the way that adults are. And so this is a rite of passage taking you from childhood into adulthood. And Maurice Bloch calls this book Prey into Hunter, because they're transitioning from prey, right? They were the pigs, they were killed. But at the end of the ritual, they are the hunters. And so you can see that transition there, that rite of passage that moved them from one status to the other. So liminality, obviously you're not going to answer my questions, but you can think answers. So where does the liminality show up? Think there's any death symbolism, perhaps? Just a bit. And there are different types of rites of passage. An initiation rite is a specific subtype. This is where you have to earn your passage into the new status. So it's not just given to you. You have to fight someone. You have to prove that you're strong. You have to survive being slaughtered as a pig. And often it's very difficult. If you've met somebody who joined the military, what they were like before boot camp and what they were like after boot camp is often very different. And boot camp is an initiation ritual. Hazing that used to happen in fraternities and sororities or sports teams. Sometimes that's an example of an initiation rite. The example I gave of the movie The 300, where you have to kill wolves or whatever, that's an example of an initiation rite. You get other kinds of liminality too. Initiation rites are known as radical resocialization. Radical meaning referring to the roots, so you're changed all the way to the roots. Resocialization is referring to re-enculturation, getting new cultural information, getting new rules, getting a new understanding of your culture, because your status has changed. You can't understand your culture as a child. You have to understand it as an adult. You can't understand it as a civilian anymore. You have to understand it as a soldier or a Marine. Rituals of rebellion are another type of liminality. This is kind of fun. This is where populations are allowed to rebel so that this rebellion is kept controlled. So Mardi Gras is a good example of this. If you were to go down to New Orleans on Mardi Gras, you would see people flashing their private parts, and I do mean people, it's both men and women, and you would get arrested most parts of the world for doing that. In New Orleans on Mardi Gras, you get rewarded for it. You get lots of attention and beads, and it's very much what's normal is overturned. If you've ever been to one of those school fairs where you get to throw a pie in the face of one of the teachers or dunk the principal in the dunk tank, that's an example of a ritual of rebellion. And some anthropologists think that this enforced rebellion, where you're allowed to rebel but within certain parameters, is a very good way of keeping rebellion under control. Now, if I were there, I would say, so can you think of an example of a liminal phase we've seen recently, such as last week, that was a ritual of rebellion? And somebody would raise their hands and say, Rumspringa, and I would say, that's exactly right. So you get this rebellion, but it's not free-floating. It has a beginning and an end, and you expect to do it, and it keeps real rebellion under control. Finally, communitas. Communitas is this overarching sense of connecting to other people so that your own individual identity fades away. You see this in religious rituals. You see this in, if your sports team wins the championship and you suddenly love everybody around you and they all love you and you're high-fiving strangers, that's communitas. And once again, normal rules don't apply. You have no fixed identity. Not so much death symbolism with communitas, but it can be there. All right, so Laurie Leonard, hope you can see this. Female circumcision. This is one of the articles that I had you read in Sacred Realms. And this is a rite of passage that Leonard is describing. She's talking about young girls among a tribe called the Sara who are undergoing female genital cutting. Now, hold on. You'll hear different terms for this. Female genital mutilation, you will often hear. But much like the word cult, mutilation is one of those words that implies a lot of judgment. And a lot of anthropologists will say female circumcision, which is the emic term, but a lot of anthropologists have chosen just the word cutting because there's nothing positive or negative about cutting. In any case, you're talking about modifying the female genitalia as a rite of passage so that a girl goes from childhood to adulthood, but she has her genitalia reconfigured through surgery of some kind. This is a rite of passage. I have here, it's very similar to the initiatory circumcision of young Maasai men in Kenya. The Maasai are